Please welcome Tomas from Prism, who talks to us a little bit about communities and Web3.
All right. Can everyone hear me? Yeah, so first of all, thanks for coming out. Obviously giving a talk on communities and the future of ownership. I'm going to use the term co-ownership a lot, and by that I mean community ownership. Quickly on me, I am the founder and CEO of Prism. Prism is the Web3 platform for community ownership. We really help groups of friends purchase NFTs as a team and use them together, things like that. And our mission is to redistribute capital to the edges. So first of all, what is capital? Capital is a resource that someone has access to that allows for them to get some sort of undue value from it, whether it's influential value, financial value, things like that. So we often hear the terms financial capital, which we all know about very well, and then we hear about social capital and political capital. Capital right now is really in the hands of billionaires and institutions, whether it's a cultural capital item that's also financial in nature, like a sports team that's owned by billionaires, or creative capital that's really owned by a lot of Web2 platforms. The average people are starting to fight back, and how they're doing that is by organizing themselves into communities. So we're seeing movements like this in the Web 2 world and in the Web 3 world. So let me compare and contrast them just for a moment. We all know about Wall Street Bets. It's a community of about 12 million people on Reddit. And in 2021 of January last year, they coordinated, at least in a human way, to take down Melvin Capital by buying a bunch of GME stock. And I'm going to compare that to Constitution DAO, which really is the same pent-up angst, but distilled in a much more precise manner, because they really used Ethereum to enable not only human coordination in a loose way, but in a much more precise way, but also capital coordination. So Ethereum is a substrate for really human and capital coordination. And underpinning that is this new superpower offered to communities called co-ownership. So what co-ownership allows you to do is pool funds and really own anything. And it's enabled by these primitives that we've built over really like the last 5 years since Ethereum was concepted. So first of all, we have multi-signature wallets, which are really great for capital coordination, human coordination. We have tokens, which allow for on-chain representations of ownership. Then we have NFTs, which of course got popularized last year, which are really a primitive for digital property rights. So let's break this down, all three of the components, right? So NFTs, like I mentioned, are digital property rights. What it really is just a file format to hold all sorts of capital. So it's been an instrument to upload financial capital from the real world, but I think what's even more interesting is that it's bringing markets to intangible forms of capital, like social capital and media capital that previously just did not exist. So lots of NFTs represent IP ownership behind media. NFTs can represent content, like when we purchase a mirror edition, perhaps on a mirror. They can also represent in-game assets. And why this is really important is we're really a generation that is creating a lot of value on the internet. Internet economies are much more large nowadays than the real world, right? But in the Web 2 form of doing things, I'm going to compare and contrast Web 2 content platform YouTube, which we all know about, with Web 3 content platform Mirror. YouTube really was this way for creators and consumers to form around their ecosystem. They contribute either to their network effects through creating content or consuming content. But the value ends up accruing completely to YouTube. And contrast that with Mirror, where it's a direct relationship from creator to consumer. Creators are creating content capital, and consumers are purchasing that and owning that piece of capital themselves. And like I described earlier, because capital is power, what's really happening is NFTs are redistributing power to this internet native generation. So it's a really important primitive to understand for later parts of the presentation. So why is capital, I guess I just described why capital ownership is important, is because it allows for you to control that asset, right? And NFTs are a big part of that. What does ownership really mean? There's a reason why at Prism we don't brand ourselves as the group investing platform. We brand ourselves as the group ownership platform. Ownership takes transactions like investing and consumption into control. It's the ability to add net new value when you have a stake in something. So let me paint a few examples. Let's say, for instance, you own some land. Through ownership, you can input labor, input construction, and actually build a city on top of it, right? So suddenly you've created more value through ownership. If you own IP, then you can actually develop content with that IP. Let's say you own a Moonbird or something like that. You can create a TV show with the Moonbird as a character, or get it in your favorite game. And you can also put assets that you own to work, right? So we're seeing this in the play-to-earn economy, where these assets are actually just completely monetizable. So now let's pivot to all the community infrastructure that allows for co-ownership. We're all familiar here with multi-signature wallets if you're here at the DappCon conference. So multi-signature wallets are really multiplayer accounts in Web3, which allow for multiple people to coordinate both in a human way and coordinate capital. And like any wallet, they allow for you to log into different Web3 interfaces and initiate any sort of transaction. When you initiate a transaction, let's say you and your friends set up a Gnosis safe. You just want to buy a Bored Ape with your friends, right? So you're chucking in money into the Gnosis safe, and a problem arises. John might be chucking in 2 ETH, and then Cindy might be chucking in 3 ETH. So either they need to start an Excel sheet and start tracking who owns what, or they need to use another Web3 primitive, which is really tokens. So I'll get into that in a second. Another problem really arises when you start really getting going with this multiplayer account to co-purchase things. Maybe you bought that Bored Ape with Cindy and John, and then now you want to bring 5 other friends onto the cap table, if you will. You suddenly need to value your assets in the Gnosis safe and open up some sort of priced funding round, bring in those 5 friends, and really print ownership again on chain. So Softshell here for Prism, we're really a protocol that stitches together these primitives like multi-signature wallets, on-chain representations of ownership, and DAO valuation to allow for friends to raise funds. We actually issue NFT membership cards with your ownership stake connoted in them. There's some other fun stuff you can upload in there. And then once you have your ownership stake and everyone's comfortable what they own, you can put those assets to work, buy NFTs, and then you update the valuation, open up another funding round, and rinse and repeat. Right, so protocols like Prism enable this. Syndicate is also a protocol that enables this pretty well. Juicebox can be used with Gnosis to accomplish the same goal. So what does co-ownership actually allow communities to do, right? So of course, we went over this example of purchasing a Bored Ape with your friends. So you can access expensive assets. That's one primary benefit. And then I suppose if you're some sort of like art collective, you may be chucking in not just Ethereum into this Gnosis safe, you might be sharing all sorts of generative art that you kind of identify with. So it allows for you to kind of share assets with your friends, bond in a deeper way, things like that. And then if you're purchasing an asset with actual utility, which sometimes in NFT world, it's not typically the case, you can actually use that asset with friends. So a good example is Creator Cabins. They've kind of rebranded just to Cabins, which allows really for people to pull together money, take those funds and purchase real world real estate, right? So they're trying to be like a network city by allowing multiple people to own different pieces of property, and then they can all kind of co-use them. So if you're a skeptic, you might think, okay, co-ownership allows you to access assets you can't afford. All right, that's a good benefit, but really fractionalization of any asset allows for that. There's many different Web 2 platforms like Otis, Web 3 platforms like Fractional, which allow you to buy fractional shares of Bored Apes. So that can't just be the benefit on its own. So maybe it's just about sharing these assets with friends, co-utility, and things like that. But actually, there's a lot of great renting and lending platforms on Ethereum, like NFTFi, that allow for that. So these benefits are good, but it's not enough to make co-ownership, I think, a really compelling alternative. How I think about like how co-ownership can be different and better than those alternatives is co-ownership leads to co-creation. It's the ability for communities to come together, coordinate around the asset, create some sort of like input some sort of positive sum labor to extract more value from that asset. So let me break that down through my favorite example right now that's going on in this space. So we can all talk about future examples, but this is actually happening right now. Who here is familiar with Moonbirds? Okay, so those of who are not, Moonbirds is really an NFT ecosystem. It's an IP universe that's created by the Proof Collective. They have 10,000 different unique Moonbirds that they've launched. People buy these Moonbirds, which give you kind of like rights to use the underlying IP. And effectively what's going on in this NFT ecosystem is that there's several DAOs, sub-communities that have popped up that are kind of like accelerating all the activity within the ecosystem. So there's Poor Birds DAO, Hot Wings Collective, Floorbirds DAO, Deadbird Society. They all have different missions. So for example, Deadbird Society formed with the mission of really creating a sub-community of moonbirds that owned the skeleton trait, right? And then once they kind of form that community, with that IP ownership, they're starting to create more content and then create more value around the NFT ecosystem. So just to like define NFT ecosystems a little bit more and contrast it perhaps to like a Disney or something like that, NFT ecosystems are headless brands where they loosely define the brand and story to some extent, but then they allow for community members to take the assets that, or the IP within that universe and create stories and create an interoperability from it, right? And different NFT communities have different kinds of like strategies and ways they go about this. So a good comparison is the Bored Ape community and the Nouns community. So Bored Ape, Yuga, they're VC funded. They have a business development team. They're going out there. They're getting like Kanye West and like Eminem to purchase these Bored Apes. They're developing partnerships with DAOs and different communities and games, and it's much more of like a centralized approach. Whereas Nouns, it's a meme. Right, they haven't defined much other than the noun itself, and then communities have formed to accelerate that. So community ownership around these ecosystems is really multiplying and driving cultural output. Before Web3, brands were really top-down with how they bring down culture. The cool kid in high school, sort of aging myself here, would rock Supreme, and he or she would be an early consumer. They're flexing. They're getting more adopters. They're actually putting in a little bit of work here and taking a bit of social risk too. But then all of the value accrues to Supreme. Whereas in these IP universes where DAOs are forming around this IP, let's just focus on the Deadbirds example. What's actually happening is Moonbirds is creating a very loose story around their IP. Something like Deadbirds is co-purchasing all of the skeleton trade Moonbirds, and through the IP ownership, they're actually inputting labor to create different kinds of content and assets. So they've launched their own PFP collection to kind of expand their community, and their plan is to create, different kinds of written content, comic books, things like that. And ultimately, that accrues value to not only Skeleton Trade Moonbirds, but also to the Moonbirds ecosystem at large. So now, if you're taking that risk, that social risk, and putting in the work and being the early adopter in an open ecosystem, and you're doing it obviously through these communities, hopefully where you can coordinate positive sum labor, then it's really the communities that end up winning when the ecosystems are more open in nature. So my vision for the world is really like, let's say, like an open metaverse, for example. There's going to be public buildings, places to hang out that are owned by communities that are larger than the metaverse platform itself. It may be perhaps even a bigger brand than the platforms that actually create the metaverse. So what does this mean for us as a society? Well, in a world where we're feeling more distant from our governments, where we're feeling more distant physically when we're working from home and things like that, open worlds and digital communities become a place for us to connect and find meaning and purpose. And through the Web3 superpower of co-ownership, it's not just communities don't just become a place to hang out, but it's a place to build together, find value, find purpose, and ultimately becomes a whole new frontier for what we think of as belonging. Thank you. Do you have time for questions?
Yeah, we have a couple of minutes for questions, so anybody, we'll shoot down the mic to you. Nothing here.
Interesting. Yeah, am I a loudspeaker? Okay, yeah. Interesting chat, but I think I've been in the NFT space for or at least been observing it for a year. There seems to be this kind of meta, almost that sort of flows from project to project. So you can sort of see a project gets hyped up, and then next thing you know, maybe a few weeks later, or maybe 1 week later, there's another meta. So I think that's the first question: how much of it is really true community, and how much of it is sort of this meta that the traders are almost sort of jumping from one project to the other.
Yeah.
The second thing is that a lot of these, the example that you use Moonbirds, I mean, it is too expensive for the average person to afford. It is impossible that they'll be able to scale it and still maintain that kind of 10,000 member community for that kind of price. It's either it has to go down and become cheaper for everyone to sort of grow that community. Where does that sit? What's your opinion on that? That's my second question.
So first question, I would say over 90% of these NFT ecosystem projects, PFP projects, are complete garbage. So there are a 5%, I would say, with very great teams, good visions, good storytelling. They're putting in a lot of effort and effort to be interoperable with different end opportunities like games, for instance, metaverse, things like that. And then really trying to power more communities to build stories around their ecosystem. So Moonbirds, I think, is a primary, really good example. Community ownership actually allows for access to these expensive assets. So a lot of people start by forming maybe like a quick group on Prism, purchasing these assets, and if there's enough talent within there or enough intention and a mission, then they take off to become, actually add and value creative to the ecosystem that they're around. But I can't say that for all of the groups that are buying Moonbirds. But to answer your question, it is a way to access expensive assets as well.
Hey, really great presentation. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
How do you see social evolving in these NFT ecosystems? Do you think we'll still be on Discord in 3 years' time? How do you see that evolving?
Great question. So quick shill here for a new product that is coming into the Web3 ecosystem called Geneva. They're coming alongside and competing against a lot of initial like Discord native, Web3 native Discords like MetaLink, for example. So I do envision that some of these products will end up being a new home that's much more crypto native and hopefully like trumps the problems that Discord has. From what I've heard internally at Discord, they're really going through some soul searching where they're trying to see how much they want to lean into Web3 and not, right? Because they're really focused on gamers. And I think the answer is they're not going to lean into Web3 that much. So there's really an opportunity for these new competitors to emerge. So I do believe that those communication platforms are probably going to be where DAOs primarily hang out. There's going to be a lot of supplemental platforms built around it too, like a backdrop that's a bit more about an activity feed and things like that.